Yesterday, we celebrated the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. And in honor of Dr. King's birthday, we wanted to bring you a refresher on fair housing laws and how we can avoid discrimination in real estate.
We'll look at the history of the fair housing law in some real life scenarios.
Welcome back to Talking Real, brought to you by the Oklahoma Association of Realtors. You're tuned in to episode 103 back in the Talking Real studio with Jeff and Nabil. And Nabil, how's your day going?
Fantastic.
Good.
You know, just like usual.
Just the usual.
Just the usual. It's a fantastic day out in the neighborhood.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Rogers, we're here in the Talking Real studio, have a little coffee and a podcast. And, you know, yesterday was Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that brings us a good opportunity to talk about fair housing and housing discrimination today.
Yes.
And I actually, you know, went through, and it's been a number of years since I've read it, but read through Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, and it kind of inspired me that, like, I thought that we should talk about this on Talking Real today.
Are you going to read the speech?
I'm not going to read the speech. It's actually not that long, so I encourage people to go.
It isn't, right?
Yeah.
People would think that this speech is going to be very, very long, but it's not that long.
Yeah. I actually read it on Instagram, oddly enough.
Look at that.
So,
I did see that floating around yesterday.
Yeah. But, you know, it's a good time to bring that up and talk about it and have a little refresher on what the fair housing laws are, what they prohibit, what they allow, those kinds of things. Because, you know, we've come a long ways in terms of discrimination, but there is always opportunity to be better.
Right.
And we see it in a number of areas just all over the place. And so I think that it's good for us to take a look at this. And again, we've talked about on the show a number of times where there are still some lawsuits pending against Facebook that deal with how Facebook's advertising platform has a discriminatory effect.
Yeah,
and
a discriminatory nuance to it.
Exactly. And, you know, we've talked a lot about emotional support animals and service animals, and that plays into fair housing and discrimination. And so I think it's always good to have that refresher.
Yeah, for sure. And Dr. King was instrumental in getting these fair housing laws addressed and to the public and really fight for them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think he was a huge proponent of equal opportunity in housing. And what did we see? The Fair Housing Act of 1968 was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson 2 days after Dr. King's assassination.
Yeah, it said April 11th, 1968.
So, you know, there's a lot going on there. And the bottom line is that as realtors, as sort of the conduit for people to buy housing and rent housing in many cases, I think it's just crucial that we hold ourselves to a very high standard to be the professionals that understand these laws and make sure that we're doing things correctly, because, you know, a problem could arise where if we're not being vigilant, then we could be part of the problem. But also to make sure that, you know, if we're managing property for people, that making sure that they're staying compliant with fair housing laws, and just making sure we're doing our job to provide that equal opportunity and non-discrimination across the board.
And you know, a lot of times we do think we're doing a great job, and for the most part we are, but there are still some things that we might not think about that are still discriminatory. Like, you don't mean for them to be, but they are.
Absolutely.
Like, they have like the underlying, like you had explained really well, and we'll get into this, about why are you saying it, not what you're saying.
Yes.
I think that like, you know, cuts right through it.
Yeah. I'm excited to talk about that because I think it can happen inadvertently. You know, we just don't realize that we're doing it.
Right.
You know, there's obviously blatant discrimination, but then we'll talk a little bit about disparate impact and what that means, where even if you're not intending to discriminate, you could be discriminating. And also you know, when you are talking to people about properties, helping them find houses, sell houses, so on and so forth, you have to think about why you're saying what you're saying in your marketing and everything else to make sure that it isn't discriminatory, even accidentally discriminatory.
Right. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
So We briefly touched upon the fact that this was put into law in 1968. And so since then, there's obviously been additions to it. There's nothing really been taken out. Right. More protected classes have been added to it.
Right.
And obviously it's like a refinement. You see a problem, you fix it.
Exactly.
So
exactly. And I think it's worth going through the history of it a little bit,
right?
Just because it is kind of interesting, because there was a Civil Rights Act of 1866, right? So this isn't just 1968, but that's kind of where it turned in terms of like racial discrimination in housing, and the fair housing laws were enacted. But the Civil Rights Act of 1866, it specifically states that all citizens of the United States shall have the same right in every state and territory as is enjoyed by white citizens thereof, to inherit, purchase, sell, hold, and convey real and personal property. And it wasn't until 1968 that the United States Supreme Court had a case that came in that said that 1866 Act prohibits all forms of racial discrimination in real estate, whether that's committed by the government or private entities. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't until that 1968 time period that we started to see the expansion of some of this non-discrimination to all types of discrimination, and that it also applies not just to a government entity, but also to private entities as well. So mm-hmm. people that are out there renting houses. And then it was at that same time period that the Civil Rights Act of 1968 went into effect. That is what we commonly refer to as the Fair Housing Act,
right.
Was a part of that. And so that's kind of what we're talking about, the laws that were going into effect. And you're exactly right. It was 1968 that we really started to see the significant change. And of course, takes decades after that to really get it implemented and everything else. And of course, we still struggle with it today.
Right.
So
it's been almost 51 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not as long as you would think, really, I think in many cases.
Right. Because like that Civil Rights Act was 100 years prior to that.
Yeah.
So it's, that's a long way to go.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And you have to ask, well, what type of discrimination is prohibited? Because not all discrimination is prohibited. So what we're specifically talking about is protected classes. And these are things that either by law that was enacted in the Civil Rights Act, those kinds of things, or by the United States Supreme Court, who has created a protected class who says you can't discriminate against these types mm-hmm. of classes. And we're talking specifically about race, color, religion, national origin, sex, handicap, and familial status.
So, I mean, it encompasses quite a few things.
Yes.
Right?
It does.
And some of those are pretty self-explanatory.
Sure.
Right? And familial status can even go as deep into kids.
Yes.
And not just necessarily if you're married or single.
Correct.
It's kids, how old, like, everything kind of plays into that.
Absolutely. So it's very broad. And so you look at that's what's prohibited and some things that aren't prohibited, right? There's a reason that we can still do in rental applications something like a credit check or a criminal background check.
Right.
So at this point, discriminating against somebody because they've had a felony conviction, for example, is not prohibited. You are permitted to do that. To make sure that somebody, financial status, to make sure somebody's able to pay their rent. Same thing as getting a mortgage. They're able to pay the mortgage, right? People can be discriminated against based on that. That's technically discriminating, right? It's like, okay, well, you don't make enough money to pay for the house.
Right.
Well, I'm discriminating against you based on your lack of money.
Right.
Okay.
But it's important how you do it.
Exactly. So those tools, though, can't be used to sort of roundabout discriminate against somebody on the basis of race, religion, and those kinds of things. So we'll go into a little bit more detail on that, but want to at least cover what is unlawful discrimination versus what would be lawful discrimination.
Right.
Because they are different.
Yeah. And when you call something discrimination, it sounds bad.
It does.
But that's just how you kind of draw a line.
Right.
Right? It's like, okay, if you don't make X, I'm sorry you can't afford the house, which is true.
Right. And that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. It would be odd to have a law that says you can't consider somebody's financial ability to pay for a house in purchasing, right? That would be a very unusual thing. But to say, well, you can't consider the color of somebody's skin in determining whether they can purchase a house or not. Okay, that makes sense. Right?
Now you're like, whatever it is you want to call it, you're profiling them doing whatever it is. Like you're drawing your own conclusions that are not fact-based.
Right. And it's irrelevant to buying a house, right? The color of somebody's skin has nothing to do with buying a house. Their financial status does. So you can kind of see why we have certain classes that are protected and why we don't. I also do want to cover just real quickly, we're going to mention it a little bit later, I think, on the code of ethics, but it's also important to remember that as realtors, we have the code of ethics that prohibits discrimination. That's very similar to what's prohibited by the fair housing laws, but it's also been expanded to include sexual orientation. So as realtors under the code of ethics, we have gone a little bit further and said, even though it's not a protected class under federal law or state law or anything like that, we're still in our businesses under our code of ethics going to say that we're not going to discriminate against somebody based on sexual orientation. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in as an aside to kind of keep in mind.
Realtors always go above and beyond.
Absolutely. That's why we exist.
Yeah.
So let's talk about real quick. There's kind of 5 different types of discrimination that are prohibited. We've talked about the classes that you can't discriminate against, but what does discrimination mean is kind of the next step. So if there's a concern about discrimination, what is discrimination? And the first one is to refuse to sell or rent or otherwise make available a house because somebody fits within one of those protected classes. And I think that's one that everybody kind of understands, right? I can't refuse to rent to you or refuse to sell to you based on that. That's kind of the obvious one. Moving on from there, though, it's discrimination in the terms, conditions, or privileges of a sale or rental of housing or in the providing services. So you're also talking about not just selling the house, but also how we provide services. So again, you can't refuse to work with somebody simply because of their race or disability or something.
Like, oh, sorry, I'm not going to do this for you.
Exactly.
Right. Or when you would do it for everyone else.
Right. Or changing the terms, right? So, somebody comes in and they have a disability. And this is kind of a real world thing that we deal with today, right now, that's been an issue, is somebody comes in and they have a service animal or an emotional support animal. And the law says that's not a pet because of their disability. So you can't change the terms and say, well, I'm going to charge you more because you have a animal to help you with your disability as opposed to somebody who doesn't.
Right, because you couldn't charge that security deposit for a pet.
Exactly. So that's where that comes in, and you're changing the terms, or, oh, well, this person, whatever, they have kids, and so I'm going to charge them a higher security deposit because kids break things. So, you can't do that because that's, again, discriminating based on familial status.
Right.
So that's an example there.
Yeah.
Next one is use of advertising that expresses a preference for or against certain people. So we've moved on from not just selling or renting, not just the terms or conditions of a sell or rent, but now also advertising, how we advertise it.
And how you acquire these clients.
Exactly. And how you advertise a property, where you advertise it, things like that.
And it's no surprise that, demographics and advertising, everything tells you to target.
Right.
But in this case, you can't.
Right. Exactly. You can, not in a way that's discriminatory.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The next one, representations that a dwelling is not available for sale or rent when in fact it is. So saying, oh, no, I'm sorry, you can't go look at that. Nope, can't show you, it's not available. It's got a contract when it doesn't. That's something that would fall within it. And the last one is attempts to induce a person to sell or rent a property by referring to the prospective entry of people of a particular race, color, sex, religion. So we'll talk about that in a minute too. That's basically called blockbusting. And we're not talking about that old video rental store that doesn't exist anymore. Different thing. But referring to, people of a certain race are moving into this neighborhood, so you want to sell your house or something along those lines. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about.
Yeah. So before we move on, just jumping back real quick, because, you think about things as you talk about things.
That's what we do here. We don't necessarily have a script here per se.
The advertising where you can't discriminate in your advertising, so obviously that takes away some of the targeting mechanisms, right? So you can't say, oh, work great with families, right? Or work great with XYZ. You can't say stuff like that. So what is a good way that people can still be effective in their marketing and target? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, so
or lawful ideas.
Exactly. So let's talk a couple of examples in these specific categories. Let's talk about handicap, for example, somebody with a disability. So you couldn't have an ad that says something about disallowing particular handicap accessories, right? Like you couldn't say, no wheelchairs or something along those lines. But something you can do, say you've got a property that is handicap accessible in some way. So describing the features, right? So if you, for example, had a house that had, phrases that would be able to have features, services, facilities, or something like that, that would be beneficial. So, you can say things like,
no stairs.
Yeah. So, first floor, walk-in closets,
Right.
Things like that. I mean, you can describe the amenities and features that are available. That would be acceptable. Same things like familial status, right? So you have to be careful about saying something like neighborhood pool, great for the kids. There's nothing wrong with saying there's a neighborhood pool or there's a neighborhood park, but you have to be careful about saying things like great for families or something along those lines, because that's when it starts getting to say, well, now we're showing a preference for somebody that has, a family, and maybe we're trying to push people away that don't have families.
Right.
Right. And so it's not just saying people that have kids or people that don't have kids, right? It's how are we describing these things in a way? And so talk about the features, talk about the amenities, those kinds of things. But you have to be careful about avoiding specific references to those protected classes.
Be as objective as possible.
Absolutely.
Right. And I mean, so you mentioned has a neighborhood pool, great for kids. That could also have, if there's a buyer that doesn't have kids but likes pools, that might deter them anyway, to be like, oh, there's probably a lot of kids in this pool and I don't want to touch that.
Right.
Right. So that could also just have like a detrimental effect in the advertising itself, other than the fact that it is violating the Fair Housing Act.
Exactly. And so you have to watch out for that disparate impact that we've talked a little bit about, to where, again, it's inadvertent. You're not intending to discriminate against somebody,
right?
But you've said something that has that discriminatory impact. And that's also, just touching on disparate impact, that's also all of your policies and everything else. So if you have some sort of advertising policy that is discriminatory. So talking about advertising, we've just touched on a little bit about what you can and can't say, but what about where you put it, right? You have to think about, are you only advertising in selective publications that only target people of particular races, for example? So that could be an issue. Or, specifically avoiding publications, right? Because there's various ethnic communities will kind of have their own newspapers, things like that, right? And so are you advertising only in one that is generally targeted towards a particular race? Or are you more broadly advertising? Or are you avoiding one that targets to a particular race?
Right.
Because those are the kinds of things that you have to think about as well. As if you're advertising, where are you advertising? And are you doing that in a way that isn't discriminatory or have a discriminatory impact?
Now, sometimes when you're advertising, you're not necessarily thinking about, oh, I'm not advertising in this because of X. You're just thinking, I'm advertising in this because I've seen a good return, or, I have $500 and this is all I can afford.
Sure.
So how do you work around that?
Yeah, I think that, again, you have to be careful about what is the impact. And so you have to just be very conscious about, I don't need to be doing things that would have a discriminatory impact. And this is just part of being a professional. You have to think about that, right? I don't have like a set answer of this is what you can do, this is what you can't.
Right.
It's not a black and white issue necessarily. And so you have to very much think about how I am doing this. Am I doing this in a way that could have a discriminatory impact that could get me in trouble if I don't do something to kind of fix that impact? Right. And so it's a thing that you got to be careful about and think about how you're doing it and what you're doing. So it's just, again, being very conscious about it. Now, obviously, you can still advertise in those places. You can still do those things. You just have to look at the big picture about what is my overall advertising strategy, and am I doing it in a way that's non-discriminatory? Am I saying things that are non-discriminatory?
If someone brought this up, would I get in trouble?
Yeah,
right?
I mean, and so again, it's and a lot of times it's not conscious, right? You're not intending to do it. So, but you have to think about that, and especially if you're a broker, right? You have to think about what is your office policy on this? Do you have training that you're providing? Are you making sure all your individual agents are doing things correctly and trying to watch out? Because, you have to think about what's at stake here. And if you have somebody that files a complaint against you, I mean, you're talking not just actual damages. You could theoretically have punitive damages. You can have significant amounts of administrative penalties from a, administrative agency, something along those lines. And so it could be a significant financial burden if you're found to be in violation. But also there's just that embarrassment, right? Like you don't want to be the person that's found to be in violation
You don't want to get
for
in trouble.
discriminating against people,
Yeah.
right? So that's why we have to be very careful about this.
And I think what you mentioned were your policies and procedures. That is probably your best defense to this.
Right.
Be like, this is, as long as those policies aren't discriminatory.
Yes.
You can't be like, well, in our policy, it says we only advertise to family. No, you can't do that.
Right.
But if you do have policies to be like, hey, we did this according to our policies, which are non-discriminatory and, somehow things happen, right? You just ended up going in one direction.
Right.
Which is unfortunate and unintentional.
Sure. Absolutely. And so, yeah, having good policies that you've thought about this, that you are planning around it, and that you're doing training, offering education, again, because these laws do sometimes change, and also just having that reminder, because so much of this can be inadvertent. And so making sure that you're paying attention to that and you're providing that training so that your agents are constantly thinking about it. It's in the forefront of their mind and they're paying attention to that, I think is really important.
Yeah.
So a couple of issues I wanted to talk about real quick as we're kind of getting close to wrapping this up. A couple other types of conduct that are prohibited by the fair housing laws that get brought up a lot and some less so. One, I mentioned blockbusting earlier. And what that refers to is basically the suggestion during an effort to solicit a listing that a seller should sell or get rid of their property because people of a particular race, religion, sex, national, one of these protected classes are moving into the neighborhood, right?
Like it's like this neighborhood is turning.
Yes,
right?
that's you nailed it. Exactly. An unsavory element is starting to move into the neighborhood, or they're building that apartment complex across the street, and you know what kind of people move into apartment complexes. I mean, there are all these types of things that you have to be very careful about, that you're not out there trying to solicit listings because of that. That's called blockbusting, and that's, again, trying to use this scare tactic of, this, unsavory element is moving in or something along those lines. That's something that you have to be very careful about.
Right. And we'd also mention steering.
Yes.
Which is, I think, the same but opposite.
It is. No, you're right. It is. It's the same, but different. It's influencing a person's housing choice based on those protected classes. I hear steering get thrown out a lot, and making a recommendation to somebody isn't necessarily legal steering that's discriminatory. Saying, you told me that you really, like when we first met, you told me that having a 3-car garage was a must have. And this house you're thinking about, you're between these two houses. This one has a 3-car garage. This one doesn't. I wanted to remind you that, that was a drop dead thing for you when we first met. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's not steering. That's got nothing to do with race, religion, handicap, or otherwise. But again, it's going back to, well, you might want to think about this house over here. It's a little bit better neighborhood. You start going down a line of why are you telling them that?
Right.
Okay. And this is what we talked about earlier, is it's not just what you say, but it's kind of why you're saying it as well. So
like this neighborhood has a great park.
Right. And that's fine, but you really need to think about, why are you saying what you're saying? Are you telling this potential purchaser something that is what ultimately is for a discriminatory purpose, even unintentionally, right? And so that's what steering is, that I'm starting to steer this family purchaser to a particular neighborhood because I think that that's better for families. Well, now you've got an issue where, we're creating neighborhoods of people that, okay, this neighborhood's only for families.
Right, because it's got a park or a pool.
If you don't have kids, you can't live here. That's the logical conclusion that it ends in. And again, that's based on race, religion or otherwise, right? So somebody of a particular religion, and you're steering them, making a recommendation, steering them towards a particular neighborhood because there's other people of their religion in that neighborhood, right? These are the kinds of things that we have to be careful about. And even if we're not directly saying that, like, oh, hey, you should go move to this neighborhood because other Catholics live there, right? Okay, that's obviously steering based on religion, but are you making a recommendation or otherwise based on that you're not intending to?
Right. Now, you could recommend neighborhoods and areas if it was like commute time to work, if that's an important factor.
Exactly. So if it's for a completely non-discriminatory purpose, again, oh, you said you wanted a pool. This house has a pool, or this neighborhood has a pool. You really wanted that.
Yeah.
This one's closer to your work. You said you wanted to be under 10 minutes to work. Well, this one's only 8 minutes from work. So that may fit your criteria. Those objective, non-discriminatory criteria are perfectly acceptable to discuss and remind people and those kinds of things. So that's what we talk about when we're talking about steering. Sometimes that term gets thrown out for things that aren't discriminatory steering under fair housing laws. So want to touch on that.
Yeah.
Man, we've thrown out a lot of information. I know it's been a ton of stuff, but I think we are probably well over time on what we schedule. So we're creeping on that. So we want to wrap it up here, but I wanted to take this opportunity to discuss the fair housing laws, to have a little update and refresher on what that means, and make sure that everybody's being vigilant. As we're moving into 2020, maybe you need to have another office meeting, something along those lines, and have a little bit of training on it to make sure everybody is up to speed on exactly what's required, because you may not get continuing education on this all the time. So it's good to make sure that you're doing your part to stay up to speed on fair housing laws, and that we as an industry are remaining vigilant to not be discriminatory.
Yeah. And although this subject is important and everyone knows it, sometimes you think you know it, right? And you're not doing it, but that unintentional kind of under the radar steering and discrimination is kind of really what you have to look out for.
Absolutely. Because that does take us in a direction that over the long term regresses us back to places we don't want to be. We want to be moving forward in a better position. So we got to watch out for that accidental discrimination as much as the blatant discrimination.
Right.
So, well, Nabil, I hope that was some good information for folks.
Hope so. They'll let us know if it's not.
We've got some new stuff coming down the pipeline for you. We're going to talk about some exciting stuff that came out of the 2020 Consumer Electronics Show. We're going to be bringing that in an upcoming episode.
Our yearly tech updates.
Yes, yearly, multi-yearly. We did that multiple times. But yeah, we got some cool stuff coming out of the Consumer Electronics Show that just happened. And so we're going to bring you some information on that. We got some guests that we're lining up. We're going to bring in some various local board presidents to talk about what's going on all across the state, and a lot of exciting things coming on the pipeline that we're excited to bring you every week here on Talking Real.
Yep.
Don't forget, you can sign up for our Capital Conference that's coming up.
That's right.
What's the website for that?
okrealtors.com/Capital Conference.
There you go.
It is March 3rd and 4th right here in Oklahoma City.
Free.
So
get signed up. Come check it out. Come hang out with us. It's going to be a good one. Talk to your legislators and get a variety of other exciting things going on. So check out that conference.
And also check out the Region 9 conference.
Yes.
That we are hosting this year.
Yes.
It is again in Oklahoma City. And the website for that is narregion9.com.
We look forward to seeing you there as well.
Yeah, that's going to be a really fun out-of-the-box conference.
Absolutely.
Got to show off Oklahoma.
Absolutely. Make Oklahoma look good.
That's right.
So we appreciate you guys coming back every single week. And what do we always ask for, Nabil?
If you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button and share this podcast with a fellow real estate enthusiast and people at your office so they can learn more about fair housing.
Absolutely.
And other topics.
So we thank you for your referrals and recommendations.
That's right.
And until next time, we'll see you next Tuesday on Talking Real.